This is a praise to the perfection of wisdom, the mother of all the Buddhas of the three times, past, future, and present, which is
皆様、時間にはまだ早いのですが、始まってしまいましたので、
beyond words, inconceivable, inexpressible, unproduced, and unobstructed in the nature of space, the objective domain of the self-aware wisdom. And then that Yatha Gade Gade Para Gade Parasan Gade Bodhi Soha mantra of Heart Sutra. And next is a salutation verse from Abhisamaya Alankara by Maitreya. Through the knowledge of all Shravakas, or disciples seeking peace, are led to true peace through the knowledge of the path. Those intending to benefit transmigrating beings fulfill the aims of the world. Being perfectly endowed with omniscient mind, the Munis or sages give various teachings with all kinds of aspects. I bow down to the mother of the Buddhas together with the communities of hearers and bodhisattvas. And next is the salutation verses from Malamademaka Karika by Master Nagarjuna. Sorry. I prostrate to the perfect Buddha, the best of all teachers, who taught that that which arises through dependent relationship is without cessation, without arising, without annihilation, without permanence, without coming, without going, without distinction, without identity, and peaceful, free from fabrications.
Any you home Misa Masebe, any Korean Chando Togachi Pesciari, any Chum Hogi Une, Chans Koroji Pesciari, that's the Chandragi. Any Janan, the Tane Chando Montaji, Yari. Any Jana comes to Shumane, Pejin Gashe, Yesari. Chasaga. And 그냥 사물로들이 아주 좀체. 아니 사물로리야. 그냥 처음 주시고요. Translation, okay.
So here, once again, I'm in Japan.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Once again, I'm in Japan.
Very good.
Japan, and I've met many old-time friends, and also not only the Japanese friends, but here we are gathered with so many people from different countries, such as Mongolia, Taiwan, and mainland China. So I would like to first greet you all. So we are not here, gathered here for some kind of entertainment, some kind of a festival or something, but we are here gathered for some teaching or discourse on the teaching of the Buddha. And I usually say that we are today in the 21st century, where there is so much advancement in technology and science. And today, the technologists and engineers and so forth people are thinking of actually working on creating artificial intelligence, which can work like our mind. So with regard to consciousness, perhaps the artificial intelligence could imitate the sensorial experiences, but not the mental consciousness. And today we are in a very advanced stage of science and technology. So now we have to see whether religion or spirituality is something needed and relevant or not in this world. Last time I was in Delhi and met monks, bhikshus from different countries, Buddhist countries, and at that time I posed this question to them. So this is the first question that we should ask, whether religion is needed today or not. If not, then we can leave it aside. But if you look at the world today, the actual situation, the reality of the world today, 7 billion people on this earth, each and every one wants happiness and do not want suffering. Though they want happiness and not suffering, yet many of the problems due to climate warmth, climate change, increase in the climate, and the weather change patterns change. And in California, there are wildfires, and also this also happens in Europe. So there are these natural disasters. We can't, as humans, we can't do much about them, these natural disasters. But what else is there is that people kill one another, and those who are helpless also suffer because of negligence. There are children who are innocent, and because of lack of food and nutrition, they die of starvation. And in Africa, there are civil wars, and poor and needy people are neglected. Nobody takes care of them. So these are human-made problems and difficulties. On top of the natural disasters, there are many human-made problems and difficulties. And the worst case scenario is that in the name of religion, people kill one another. Unfortunately, in Burma, there are fightings between Buddhists and Burmese Muslims, and many Muslims or Rohingyas are killed. So this is very unfortunate. And then in the Middle East also there are, and also in many of the Muslim countries, although they follow the same Allah and they follow the same Quran, and each day they do 5 sessions of prayers. So these are all same, but mainly because of some political problem, there are killings amongst the Shia and Sunnis, between the Shias and Sunnis in these countries. And so, though all of us want happiness and don't want suffering, but because of lack of altruism and taking care of others, but just thinking of victory for oneself and defeat for others, people are inflicting pain upon other humans. So the root of all these problems is the lack of compassion and love. So now there's a question here that we can raise. Of course, all of us feel dear to ourselves. We love ourselves, thinking me, but when we were born, we were actually nurtured by our mother, and our mother fed us with her milk. But because of this notion of we only think of ourselves. One time I saw, the scientists say that the basic nature of human beings is compassion. And so they showed some video where they were actually showing an infant who has not yet developed language, 6 months and younger. So they are not affected by our language. Very pure, innocent infant. And so this infant was shown a cartoon in which, in one cartoon, one child was pushing a ball uphill, and when another child comes and actually helps that child having difficulty pushing up the ball uphill, and when this was shown to the infant, 6-month child infant, human, the child was really laughing and smiling and showing an expression of happiness, joy. And in another cartoon or animation, one child again was pushing a ball uphill. Another child comes and obstructs it, coming from the opposite direction, and pushes the ball down. And when this was shown to the infant, 6-month-old infant, the infant was not, had the expression of unhappiness. And so, when people show us love and compassion, kindness, we are happy. And then medical scientists also say that when you are constantly overcome with anger, if you remain angry all the time, our immune system is actually is weakened. When you are relaxed and peaceful in mind, your immune system also will not decline. And so this is something that we can actually witness and have our experience. In a family, if the family members are loving with each other and also help each other in that spirit, in the spirit of love and joy, without which, if people in the same family live in jealousy and quarrel and fighting with each other, one another, then of course there will be no happiness in the family. So this is something that we can understand from our own common experience. And then human beings are social animals, so we are dependent on our society and community. And so love and compassion actually brings us together, whereas anger pushes ourselves. So even if you look at dogs, you can actually see this happening. So because dogs are also social animals, when they are friendly with one another, they really live happily and relaxed. Whereas if if a dog actually shows anger, whereby the hairs on its neck also stand stiff, and then of course it will not have happiness or a relaxed environment. So today, the world has so much advancement in material terms, and also modern education and knowledge has also developed and progressed so much. But when it comes to overcoming suffering, so pain and pleasure, when it comes to talk about pain and pleasure, there are two types of pain and pleasure. One is that of the sensorial, the physical ones, and the other one is mental. So these material progress and developments actually help in reducing physical pains. Yet, these external factors or facilities cannot overcome our inner unhappiness, mental unhappiness. I know people who are very rich, but very unhappy and disturbed in their mind. So there are people whom I know. And so material development alone cannot give us mental happiness. So between the two, the physical or sensorial, the physical pain and pleasure, or and that of the mental ones. So if you have all the facilities enjoyments that have to do with physical and sensorial experience, it cannot overcome our mental problems and difficulties. Whereas even if you may be surrounded by problems outside, but if you have actually peace of mind and are relaxed, then the external unconducive conditions cannot overcome our mental pleasure and happiness and joy. So today, because of our thought processes, different conceptions and so forth, we are actually creating lots of problems which have to do with our own doing. And so the so although there are lots of materials or machines that are highly advanced that can do a lot of things, but then they will not be able to bring mental happiness and cannot overcome our mental suffering. And so love and compassion are something which have to do with our sixth mind, the consciousness. They don't have anything to do with our sensorial experience. And so all the religious traditions talk about or teach love, compassion, contentment, and self-tolerance, self-discipline. So I have lots of friends amongst the different religious traditions, Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and so forth. And so people who are really sincerely practicing their own religion, they are quite different. They really serve others who are needy and poor. And so there are many people who do that amongst my friends. And so, therefore, all the religion is something that is needed in today's world. Although, philosophically, they may be different, but the main message of all these religions is love and compassion. And so these teachings of love and compassion are relevant and necessary in today's world, which lacks love and compassion. And so many of the religious traditions have developed about 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. In India, for example, there was the Sankhya school of thought, which is the oldest school of thought, and then there are other religious traditions like Vaisheshikas, Vedantas, and then Jainism, and so forth. And then Buddhism came after Jainism. And so first, between the Buddhism and Jainism, Jainism came first. I have many friends who are Jains, and so they really practice nonviolence and also take to that of vegetarianism. And then Buddhism came in India. And later, in the Middle East, Jesus Christ, the founder of Christianity, came, and from him started Christianity. And then Judaism also developed in the Middle East, and then Mohammedans, the Islam, also developed in the Middle East. So these Middle Eastern religions, of course, they teach love and compassion, but with regard to a philosophical idea, they believe in a creator God who created the whole cosmos. Whereas in India, from Sankhya down, within the Sankhyas, there are those of the theistic and non-theistic schools of thought. So the theistic religious, the Sankhya, say that the whole sentient beings are created by God. Of course, they won't say that the sentient beings were created only in this life, but because they believe in past and future lives as well. But ultimately, they say everything came from Brahma. And so, in other words, amongst the religious traditions of the world, there are two camps. One which believes in a creator God, but the creator God is not said to be full of anger or anything, but it is said to be all merciful. And so when it's said that such a God created us, God full of love created us, then what we can actually understand is that, and of course, those who sincerely practice their religion, they actually believe in all sentient beings being a creation of the same Father, and an excellent, good Father, and so who is full of love. And so the creation of such a Father has the nature of love and compassion as well. And so what the scientists also say makes sense in relation to these theistic religious traditions as well, that we have the basic human nature is love and compassionate. And then in India, we had the Sankhyas, and then there are within the Sankhya there is this sect which didn't believe in a creator God. So the other religious traditions that evolved in India all believe in an independent self. So because they say that this independent self has no beginning, they didn't have this belief in a creator God as such. They didn't need to assert this. So apart from Buddhism, all the religious traditions, other religious traditions believed in an independent self called soul or Atman in India. And whereas Buddhism doesn't believe in such an independent self. And so since this self or a person is without beginning, there is no creation, or it's not created by a God. And so I also say that those who believe in a creator God, of course, that's a different case, but all the religious traditions are related with human beings. So we have human religions, religion of human beings. So because of this, love is the most important thing in our life. So because we have natural inclination to consider this very important and valuable, all the religious traditions also emphasize this love and compassion. So philosophically we are different, but here today we are dealing with Buddhism, and so Buddhism does not believe in a creator God, just like the non-theistic Sankhya and Jainism. Buddhism also doesn't believe in a creator God. Whereas the difference between Buddhism and the other two non-theistic schools are that they believe in an Atman, or an independent self or soul. So Japan historically is a Buddhist country, and also Koreans. Korea also is a Buddhist country, and China historically is a Buddhist country, and Vietnam also. So all these countries are Buddhist countries. On top of that, we have Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos, and Sri Lanka. So almost all of Asia historically are Buddhist. So when I meet with people, I say that the first thing is that I always consider myself one of the 7 billion people. In Buddhism, we talk about all mother sentient beings, and we pray that I'll call upon all sentient beings as my guests for the Feast of Enlightenment and happiness. And so each day, when we take bodhisattva vows or generate bodhicitta, we think like that all the sentient beings are our mother sentient beings, and therefore the 7 billion people on this earth are like our dear friends. And including also, together with them, all the animals and insects, down to the smallest insects like ants and so forth, all of them are our own near and dear ones. In Bodhisattva Charyavatara, it is said that today, before the eyes of the Tathagatas or Sugatas, I actually call upon all sentient beings to the feast of happiness and that of the Tathagataship, and therefore all humans and non-humans, non-gods and so forth, be happy. And so when we think along these lines, there is no one whom we can actually put aside, saying that they are our enemies or adversaries, and these are our near and dear ones and so forth. So therefore, when I give tantric initiations, I don't do the ritual related with giving some dharma offering, ritual cakes to shoo away the evil, so-called evil beings. So when I do that, I sometimes feel that these so-called the spirits may be actually feeling surprised that this person, in the morning when he prays for all sentient beings to have a happiness and so forth, but then when he does this kind of ritual, this monk actually, so though he actually calls upon all sentient beings as his near and dear ones, and then when he does this kind of ritual, he actually drives us away, calling us evils and so forth. So that doesn't really feel compatible with what he had prayed in the morning. And therefore, I these days do not do this dharma offering during the tantric rituals. And so instead of considering certain sentient beings as one's adversaries and so forth, and to drive away, we should meditate and cultivate love and compassion for all sentient beings, and that will be beneficial to all of us. And therefore, all sentient beings, looking at them as one's near and dear ones. So even while we are in this cycle of existence, when we have this kind of contaminated the psychophysical aggregate, which is the result of our karma and afflictive emotions, afflictive mental afflictions, what we should do is develop love and compassion and see the the shortcomings of self-cherishing attitude, extreme selfishness, and the positive qualities of cherishing others over oneself, and then develop that of bodhicitta and progress along the path. So all of these, when we do it, when we are able to accumulate more and more merit on the basis of love and compassion, we will be able to overcome the obstacles and be able to progress along the path more quickly. So while we are at the very beginner level, at the basis level, we have to, we must depend on other sentient beings, and while we are also treading along the path to enlightenment, Buddhahood, we also have to rely on sentient beings, and therefore, as Shantideva says, if you are not able to exchange one's own happiness and joy with the suffering of others, and leave alone that of Buddhahood, reaching Buddhahood, even in samsara you will not have happiness. And therefore all religions teach love and compassion as a very important factor. And today even scientists consider love and compassion to be very important. Until towards the end of the 20th century, the scientists didn't really talk much about consciousness or mind as such. They only talked about brain. Whereas today, towards the end of the 20th century, they have started actually noticing that there is some factor which can impact our brain. And then there are cases where even after clinical death, its body remains very fresh for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and so forth. And so they are not yet dead body as such, like a corpse. And so there have been many cases like this, where the body still remained very fresh even after clinical death. My own teacher, Yongzin Ling Rinpoche, also stayed in that state for 13 days. And so doctors actually checked his body, and they actually found that he had stopped breathing, and the flow of heart pumping blood also had stopped, and therefore blood going to the brain also had stopped. And so when that had happened, when the brain death has happened, then the medical scientists say that the person is dead. But then still the body remained very fresh, and so the scientists have not much explanation, no explanation to this kind of phenomena. Whereas now some scientists have started some research and experiment on people who were clinically dead. So they have started some research project to investigate what happens after clinical death. So we talk about the phenomenon of Tukdam, but we're not sure who will actually stay in Tukdam or not. Some people who do not look so much religious and doing all kinds of prayers and so forth, sometimes they remain in Tukdam even after clinical death, whereas people who are really seen as good practitioners, are seen not to stay in Tukdam. And so we can't actually go and ask people to please die, and so that we could do this kind of investigation, scientific investigation. One of the former Garden throne holders of the Geluk school, Venerable Lobsang Nyimala, died, and 3 or 4 days after his death, people have actually given me the information about his passing away. And so Sorry. And so the scientific instruments were actually used to check his body. And one of the scientists who was doing this research actually said there was something that had happened in his brain even after that clinical death. And so there is something called consciousness, which some of the scientists who are unbiased do seem to believe in a phenomenon of consciousness apart from the brain, which can actually impact the brain. And so the first thing that I do in the world when I give these kind of teachings and give talks, I emphasize on the promotion of love and compassion, which even the scientists consider important. And then second commitment that I have is the promotion of religious harmony. All religions teach love and compassion, as I said before. So in the name of religion, killing one another is really unfortunate because of some philosophical difference. To do that is very, very unfortunate. And so there have been many religious traditions, such as Tsongkhapa, and then other religious traditions that evolved from there in India, and then in the Middle East, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam came. But for the last thousands of years, all these major religious traditions have lived together, coexisted in India. So India is one of the countries which has the biggest population. So of course there have been lots of arguments and debates amongst the different schools of thought in India, even amongst the Buddhists themselves, because on the basis of difference in their philosophical ideas and assertions. But then these debates were not carried out with animosity and to defeat one another with animosity. And therefore, since religious harmony exists in India, I believe that it could be also promoted and practiced in the rest of the world as well. So I work for religious harmony. And then thirdly, as a Tibetan who is trusted by the Tibetan people, therefore I have a responsibility on Tibetan people. So since 2001, I gave up almost all of the political responsibilities and remained like retired. But then, especially since 2011, I have devolved my political authority and responsibility to the elected political leadership of the Tibetan people. And so what I am able to do today is to mainly, of course, to promote the Tibetan culture and tradition, especially that of the teaching of the Buddha, which is the Nalanda, which belongs to the Nalanda lineage tradition. The Buddhism that we as Tibetans have does not exist anywhere else in the world. And so in the 8th century, Master Chandarakshita came to Tibet and established this tradition in Tibet. The Nalanda tradition, pure Nalanda tradition itself was established, and Nalanda tradition emphasizes that of logical approach. And so, as Chandarakshita himself was A logician as well as a philosopher, Tibetan Buddhism follows his tradition, and the emphasis is given on reason and logic rather than faith alone. And therefore, the Buddha himself, as the Buddha himself has said, O monks and scholars, just as gold is tested by rubbing, cutting, and burning, likewise you should examine my teaching and then accept it, not because you have faith or devotion in me. And so, since the Nalanda masters followed reason, they have actually said that such and such teachings of the Buddha cannot be taken literally because they actually are undermined by reason and logic. And such other teachings could be taken as definitive because, can be taken literally because they do not go against reason. And so, they, because of the emphasis on reason, so they say that when the certain teachings actually do not stand to the test of reason, they cannot take it literally, these teachings literally. And therefore, what is emphasized is Reason as opposed to faith alone. So once I met some Thai Buddhists from Bangkok Buddhist University. So we actually discussed on things which are common to the Pali and Sanskrit traditions, such as the Four Noble Truths, the 16 aspects, and the 37 factors or harmonies of enlightenment, and so forth. And when during that discussion, I asked them whether they actually explained the Four Noble Truths and the 16 aspects through reason or by resorting to scriptural authority, and they said scriptures. And so I reflected on what is said in the Pramana Vartika Karika by Master Dharmakirti, where these points are explained through reason. And so, if we actually resort only to scriptural authority alone, we may not be able to have discussions with modern scientists. So because we are able to have these kind of discussions with scientists, what is said in our text, such as about psychology, logic, and reasoning, and so forth, the scientists also admire them. And in our scriptures, there are mentions of the creation or the evolution of the universe. Such as there are 4 stages, such as the called evolution, and then the endurance of the universe, and then finally the destruction, and then of the empty stage. And so these are explained on the basis of the 5 different elements, such as fire, water, and so forth. And so, when we have discussions with scientists, we also learn a lot. And scientists also get a lot of knowledge, greatly beneficial knowledge, especially in terms of psychology, emotions, and so forth. And then with regard to quantum physics, the idea or the concept that we have regarding quantum physics is more extensive and more detailed. So, for over 30 years, nearly 40 years perhaps, we have had this kind of discussions with modern scientists, and we are able to mutually benefit one another. And so if we only had resorted to scripture alone, we would not have been able to have start this kind of discussion and dialogue. So when I started discussing about having discussions with scientists in the beginning, some of our elder scholars, monk scholars, abbots and so forth have actually were not so happy about it. They didn't agree. And then there are some other Western friends whom I have met and discussed about having discussions with scientists and who also warned me against that. But then, having had discussions with scientists, we found it very beneficial to one another. And today, our monastic institutions of learning have actually started teaching science, and they have also built laboratories in their monasteries for science, doing experiments in science. And the science is one of the subjects that the monks doing Geshe degree program actually have to sit for examination also. So this is a development that has happened in our monastic institutions. And so we have, on the one hand, kept the tradition of Nalanda monastic institution, using reason and so forth in the study of Buddhism and Buddhist philosophy, and also are able to have this kind of discussions with scientists. And today in China proper, there are over 400 million Buddhists. So the Nalanda tradition, which follows both the Madhyamaka, the middle way school of philosophy, together with logic, exists only in the Tibetan tradition. And so we don't only do rituals, reciting prayers and rituals, but the way we go about with our study is by memorizing the root texts written by Indian masters, and then we also go through these texts word by word, and then listen to explanations through from our teachers, and also do lots of analytical analysis and investigation into the teaching, through which we are able to draw conviction in the teaching of the Buddha. And through that conviction, which is drawn or developed through reasoning, analysis, and investigation, we are able to do the meditation on it, on the teaching of the Buddha. And so we actually make distinction between the Geshes who actually got their Geshe degrees before 1959, and those who have received the Geshe degree after coming into exile in India. We make difference between them. Again, Nima and other scholars who actually were the Geshes before 59 were really marvelous. And again, Ishu Wangchuk and so forth. So though we are refugees in India, we have still been able to keep up with our own religious tradition, our own cultural tradition, this Nalanda tradition, which is able to sit together with modern scientists and have dialogues. So this profound and vast tradition, perhaps it may seem to be I may seem to be boastful about it, but I do say that this tradition that we have is a treasure of the world. So when we have discussions with scientists and we actually explain the Buddhist philosophy and so forth, they also find it quite interesting. They take interest, pay attention to, and there are more and more people who are following reasoning are more and more attracted to the teaching of the Buddha. So they really admire. And so in the Western countries, when I give talks, I do not try to propagate or try to spread Buddhism there. I don't find it very convenient to do that, to give Buddhist teaching as such, because the Western countries are more or less Judeo-Christian background in terms of their religion. But in Japan, I don't find it uncomfortable, and I don't feel shy to give teaching on Buddhism. Or so today I actually have found, after having discussions with so many people, from scientists through also to the religious, spiritual leaders and so forth, I found that Buddhism, the Tibetan language, is the best language for explaining that of the Nalanda tradition. Indian texts such as Mula Madhyamaka Karika, the Fundamental Wisdom Treatise of the Middle Way by Nagarjuna, and so forth, were already translated into Chinese before Buddhism came to Tibet. But there is not much study of the classic Indian texts in China and other Buddhist countries like it is prevalent in Tibet, and therefore although in the past the study of Buddhist philosophy, the classic texts of India and so forth, were confined to the monastic institutions, but in the since the 1960s and 70s, I have actually played it or suggested to all the monasteries and nunneries of Tibetan Buddhist traditions to pursue study of Buddhist philosophy. And so today we have female geshe mas who have completed their study for over 17 years or so. And so, in the beginning, of course, with regard to bhikshuni ordination, it is something that I cannot do much. But when I initially suggested about having Geshe Ma degree program, a degree for the nuns, Tibetan Buddhist nuns, some of the elderly monks and abbots have actually said, how could that be? But then I said, since the Buddha himself has given equal, privilege or to have bhikshuni ordination, just like bhikshu ordination, why not? Why can we not have? Why can we not have geshe mas? And so today we have female geshe mas, which is a degree equivalent to a PhD in the modern academic institutions. And so there are nuns who are geshe mas who are really good in debate as well. And then today in China itself, some Chinese academics who have taken interest in Tibetan Buddhism also are taking interest in learning Tibetan language. So on the one hand, all of us human beings want happiness. So the root of happiness is our love and compassion. And the factor which disturbs our peace of mind is anger and hatred. So when we have disturbed state of mind, in order to do away with it, I mean, the alcohol and drugs and so forth, tranquilizers cannot help alleviate this disturbance in the peace of mind. What actually disturbs our mind, all kinds of conceptions and preconceptions, thought processes, such as jealousy, sense of competition, and so forth, are the ones which disturb our peace of mind. And therefore, we need to develop patience or tolerance and love to counter these by familiarizing our mind with these factors. And so the more we become familiar, the more we familiarize with these positive factors, the greater the strength they gain. And therefore, this is something that these are qualities that are based on our mind. And so the very support or the basis of these qualities is very stable, the mind in general. And then this can develop further and further, become more and more strengthened, more and more powerful. And so the main antidote to this undisciplined mind, we as the followers or who recite the Heart Sutra, in the Sanskrit, following the Sanskrit tradition, so the main factor to discipline our mind is to have bodhicitta, this altruistic state of mind. So by which we actually consider all sentient beings as our near and dear ones, and this naturally brings peaceful state of mind within ourselves. So bodhicitta, so bodhi refers to enlightenment, which in Tibetan is translated as chang, and chup. Chang in the sense of purifying our negativities, defilements, and so forth. And once all these defilements, which actually veil our mind from seeing the reality of how things are, so because of this veil, we are not able to see the reality as it is, the nature of things clearly, and then there are those of the mental afflictions, which actually, no sooner it arises, they arise in ourselves, they disturb our peace of mind, the equilibrium. And then there is also the defilement, which is called cognitive obscuration. And so when we are able to do away with these defilements, the afflictive emotions and their residual stains, the cognitive obscurations, what happens is we are able to overcome all the defilements or stains from within our mind stream. And when this happens, we are able to see the reality as it is. And therefore, to overcome this, to have this experience of purification and that of the knowledge of all things and their quiddity, we need to meditate on emptiness. So with regard to emptiness, the Chittamatras, this mind-only school, say that when they talk about emptiness, things have no external existence. Because of our mental afflictions, they say that we actually perceive things to be outside, external to ourselves, whereas it's not external. They are not external. There's no external existence, but everything is in the nature of the mind itself. Whereas in the Madhyamaka tradition, which do not assert non-externality of things, but that things do exist externally, yet they do not have any inherent existence as such. So the mere lack of external, inherent existence or intrinsic existence is called emptiness. And so things do not exist the way they appear to us. This can be actually understood established through reasoning. So what appears to us as if the things have some kind of independent objective existence is because of our erroneous outlook. So when I look at you, things do appear to have existence from their own side, whereas you do not exist the way you appear to me. Changyar Rinpoche has actually criticized, there's a criticism of the Gelugpas. So our students, he says, use the terms such as things having no solidity and so forth. But if you are not able to hit the home to the point of how things exist, you might actually drive away this old mother, referring to emptiness. And then the seventh Dalai Lama says that just as in dreams we see things such as elephants and so forth, yet they do not exist the way they appear to us. And similarly, the things in samsara that we see do not have any inherent existence. And so it is very important to understand that what appears to us, this appearance, the apparent reality, is nothing but illusion. And so whatever appears to our mind, they appear to have some kind of objective independent existence. In Jonang tradition also, of course, in the Tibetan tradition, there is criticism of Jonang tradition. Dharanatha or somebody has written, there is a song which is actually sung during talk offerings, which says, this mirror image of illusion shows itself manifestly. So all these things that appear to our senses, to our sensory perceptions, cannot be found when you actually search for their identity, what is actually designated. And so it says the mirror image of illusions manifestly show itself. And then it says, when you check the mind itself, through which this appears, unreliable awareness is clearly luminous. So, of course, this mind or consciousness has no form. It does not have any special dimension as such, but it has this temporal dimension. So the temporal continuation, and when you actually dissect the past and future and present moments, past and future, of course, do not no more there, but when you talk about the present, at that very moment, half is gone, half is yet to come. And so nothing can be pinpointed as being this and that mind. And so it's said unreliable, awareness is clearly luminous. And so the external objects that appear to us and the internal subjective mind of experience cannot be found when searched for their identity, and therefore it all disappears into the inexplicable sphere of emptiness. And so external and internal phenomena do not have any objectification, any objective existence. And because of our improper mentation, inappropriate mentation, what we see things is absolute, beautiful or ugly and so forth. But they do not, this is not there. And in the Mulamadhyamaka Karika, it is said that the three poisons of attachment, anger, and delusion arise because of our concepts. And it says that because of the inappropriate mentation, we have this kind of attachment and so forth. And the same text says that karma and delusions or afflictions are ended. When ended, there is liberation. And karma and delusions arise from conceptual constructs. And so Master Nagarjuna is the master with regard to explaining emptiness thoroughly and precisely. So in the tradition of Gyen Tongpun Rinpoche, one of the great scholars of the 20th century, to receive teaching on Mulamadhyamaka Karika, he actually made his students memorize Mulamadhyamaka Karika itself and then receive teaching on it. So Master Nagarjuna is considered the second Buddha, and so he was a great master. So when I give initiations, you'll hear a lot of times, please imagine this and that, a lot of times. And so this time I'm going to tell you, please imagine you get this tea. So one Lama was giving a tantric initiation, and amongst the audience there was someone from a nomadic area from Apohor region, and he had brought some butter intending to give it to the Lama. But when he attended the initiation, and Lama said too many times, please imagine this, imagine that, you receive this and that. And then after a while, he took the butter out of his chupa and said, please Lama, imagine you receive this butter, and then put it back into his pocket. That's enough. So first we say the Heart Sutra. So the essence of Buddhism, the essence of the Sanskrit tradition is bodhicitta and that of emptiness, a view of emptiness. So until today, these two are my principal practices. I, who have reached over 80, so of course I don't have experience of these two principles, but I have some simulated or experience which actually arise when I put effort, though I do not have the effortless experience yet. So when you are able to actually decisively confirm from your experience that things have no objective independent existence whatever, that they are merely, but that they are merely designated, it really helps to overcome one's afflictive emotions. And then with regard to the altruistic intention of bodhicitta, in the Lama Chöpa prayer also, it is said that self-cherishing attitude is the source of all problems. And so using the texts such as Bodhisattvacharya Avatara for developing bodhicitta and so forth, it really helps one to reduce self-cherishing attitude so that its strength decreases and the strength of the cherishing others over oneself increases. So as I recited or quoted from the Bodhisattvacharya Avatara, without exchanging one's own happiness, joy with the suffering of others, leave alone reaching just the Buddhahood itself, but even in samsara, the cycle of existence, you will not have happiness. So this is true. So if I remain very isolated, feel that I am His Holiness the Dalai Lama and so forth, I won't have friends. So I actually I'm able to, I actually consider others to be same as myself. Whether they are high or low doesn't matter to me. They are all same human beings like myself. And so I really don't like formality. Sometimes people smile, but when other people look at them, they actually withdraw their smile and become very stern. So, when you actually familiarize your mind by seeing the shortcomings and disadvantages of self-cherishing attitude and the advantages of the cherishing others attitude of cherishing others, it really helps one's mind. And together with it, the view of emptiness also helps. So I am actually having some kind of a hope that if I am able to develop a single-pointed concentration and concentration, I may be able to reach that of the path of preparation in this life. So when you are able to have this kind of altruistic intention, you will be able to have a very happy and healthy life here in this life, and also in the next lives you'll have. So His Holiness is asking some lines from Madhyamaka Avatara. So what these lines say is that when you have developed the experience of the view of emptiness, that automatically actually induces compassion towards other suffering sentient beings. And when you actually see that, you will be able to see that the suffering is something that can be overcome. And so when you see sentient beings actually inflicting pain upon themselves through self-cherishing attitude and so forth, you feel empathy towards them because of their lack of their ignorance about the reality of how things are. And therefore, you have this strong wish and desire to help them out of this suffering and ignorance. And so these are really helpful. So the essence of Buddhism is these two principles of bodhicitta and And so it really immediately brings happiness in one's mind, joy in one's heart, and also, I mean, it's quite immediate, and so you actually are able to think of taking on the suffering of others as well, not only wishing them to be liberated from suffering, but also so I have not received the reading transmission of this text, but I need the text. So with regard to the Prajnaparamita, the perfection of wisdom teachings of the Buddha, there is a set of teaching which is called 100,000 lines or 100,000 shlokas. So the Prajnaparamita texts, within the teaching of the perfection of wisdom, there are these sets of volumes of texts, which are the 100,000 verses, the 25,000 verses, and the 8,000 verses, and then also the Heart Sutra, which is called the 25 stanzas. Usually, I don't like to use the term Hinayana and Mahayana, where there is this notion of Hinayana being something inferior, but we cannot have that kind of a notion, because what is taught by the Buddha in this tradition is the foundation of the teaching of the Buddha. So without this foundation, we cannot add the perfection of wisdom teachings. And so the Pali tradition is the foundation of the teaching of the Buddha. So in this, the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths in Varanasi. And so right after his enlightenment, the Buddha gave this kind of teaching on the monastic vows. So the Buddha himself has said, according to the monastic code of discipline, the Buddha has said that where the three practices of the monastics, such as the bi-monthly confession and the summer retreat and then the dissolution of the summer retreat, I mean, he feels very much at ease. And so this has to do with the monastic code of discipline, which is also found in the Pali tradition, which is the foundation of the teaching of the Buddha. And then with regard to the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, there are the second turning, in the second turning, the Buddha gave the perfection of wisdom teachings, where it is said that everything has no inherent existence. But then, in the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, there is the interpretation of why the Buddha taught such, gave such teaching in the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, and this is the source of the Chittamatra philosophical tradition or philosophical school, where it says the Buddha actually gave such teaching with the three what are known as the three natures in mind, how they exist. And then within the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, there is also the third turning aspect of the third turning, which is in the Tathagata Garbha Sutra, and also there is another text which is the Sutra, which is called Dakaishi, the wisdom at the time of death. And so these form the fundamental texts for the Mahayana Uttara Tantra by Maitreya, where it talks about the Buddha nature. So Mahayana and Buddha, Hinayana is terms that I'm not very comfortable with. So in Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, Sri Lanka, and Burma and so forth, they follow the Pali tradition. And then China, Korea, Vietnam, and Mongolia, and so forth, follow the Sanskrit traditions. So for the followers of the Sanskrit traditions, it's necessary to have the foundational teachings that are found in the Pali traditions, such as the monastic code of discipline and so forth. As Kongda Rinpoche also has mentioned in a prayer for the spread of the teaching of the Master Tsongkhapa, externally you practice that of the disciples' vehicle and live the life of simplicity and so forth. And so all the followers of the Sanskrit traditions, such as Japan, we do recite that of the Heart Sutra. I don't have the text, sorry. So His Holiness is asking Venerable Teshila to get two texts, Heart Sutra and the praise to the Buddha for teaching dependent origination from his room. And so during the teaching of the Heart Sutra, there were disciples who were from different types of beings. So in the Heart Sutra, you find the dialogue between Avalokiteshvara and Shariputra. And
콜로 당구 순서를 배지 치도 저 밑조고 있어요. 저서 대시 중국의 대소. 대 산지의 그 추기 멍시소. 다 이 메다 동네 동다면시.
So if he's always saying that if someone who had no pure vision of Avalokiteshvara to be able to see Avalokiteshvara during that dialogue, and they might actually think that the Shariputra was talking to himself. And then in the teaching of the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha gave teaching first in relation to the suffering and its cause, which form one set of causality, and then that of the cessation and the path leading to it, another set of causation, which pertain to that of enlightenment. The other one, the first one, pertained to samsara. So, according to the Prasankika Madhyamaka philosophy, it is said that the objective independent existence of things appear to our sensory perceptions as well, whereas the other schools of thought do not assert that. So as long as you believe in some kind of objective existence in things, you are not able to do away with objectification in things at all. If you believe there is some objective existence still, this is still left to be overcome. So if you are able to really understand what afflictive emotions means, by understanding emptiness well, then you'll be able to see how things are actually projected with our own misconception, which sees things to have some kind of objective independent existence. And so the second turning of the wheel of Dharma emphasizes emptiness, and then the third turning of the wheel of Dharma. In the Sakya tradition, the mind's definition is that of clarity or awareness, luminosity, and its nature is emptiness, and therefore they emphasize that of the inseparability of emptiness and luminosity. The union of luminosity and this is similar to the Kagyu and the and then in the Gelug tradition, one develops that of the isolation of mind, on the basis of which then the union of clarity and emptiness is developed. And so, as Panchen Lobsang Chögyен has said, someone who is well learned in the definitive scriptures and have the experience of the teaching, a yogi, such a yogi can see that all the different traditions of Buddhism that has spread in Tibet converge to the same point. And in the Heart Sutra, it mentions form is empty, emptiness is form. So this must be understood. So when you say form is empty, so this deals with our everyday experience of dealing with these sensory objects, so such as form, which has shape and also color and so forth. So even according to quantum physics, things like this do not have any objective existence. For example, you see me, but what you actually see is my body, and you hear my voice. And when you ask, whose voice is it, whose body is it that you see? you will say it's the Dalai Lama's voice and the body. And where is Dalai Lama then? So the Dalai Lama is the one who possesses this voice and this body, and then this mind as well. So apart from these three, the mind, the voice, and the body, where is the Dalai Lama? So you will find there's nothing to point at. But when I look at you also, you appear to me as if you have some kind of objective independent existence, but when I actually look and search for that identity, your identity, there's nothing that I can pinpoint to be you. So when you use the logic or the reasoning used by the Chitta Mantras, you will not find the form as such. So the unfindability of this shows that it does not, the form or your body does not have any objective independent existence. So therefore, since it cannot be found when you look or search for the identity of the body or the form, I mean, it is said that the form is empty. As it is said in the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, what is dependently arisen is said to be empty, and that it is self-designated, and that is a middle way. And therefore, what it says is that there is nothing which does not exist by way of dependence on others. Yet, although they are dependent but cannot be found when searched for their identity, what we can say is because they do affect us, they have their own effects, and so forth, therefore they do exist. But how do they exist? Not objectively, but by way of dependence on others. And therefore the appearance of things, actually, through that we are able to do away with that of nihilism, eternalism. And when you see that things are empty of inherent existence, that does away with that of the nihilism. So when you look at me, you will actually see that I appear to you as if I have some kind of objective independent existence, but when you are able to confirm that that's not how I exist, you are able to actually see that appearance is able to do away with that of eternalism or permanence or the extreme of existence, and that of the dependent origination or emptiness is able to do away with that of the nihilism. So there is the mere appearance of things that you can actually say to exist by way of designation. And so the reasoning of dependent origination, in other words, does away with both the extremes of eternalism and nihilism. And Master Chandrakirti says that when you analyze a chariot through the sevenfold reasoning, you will not be able to establish a chariot existing from its own side. But how the chariot exists still, though it's empty, it actually exists by way of dependence on its different parts put together. So things are merely designated. So form is empty, shows that form, that the nature of form is that of emptiness. And then emptiness is form. Does not mean that a form cannot be found only through the reasoning of the diamond splinter and so forth, but because the form is dependent, and therefore, since dependent nature and independent nature, these two are diametrically opposites, because things cannot be found when you actually search for their identity, what it shows is that they do not have independent existence, but by way of dependence they do exist. And then form, the emptiness, not other than form, is form two is not other than emptiness, shows that emptiness and its form, the form and its emptiness are of the same nature, but because they are dependently existent, such as also those of the samsara and nirvana, they are merely dependently designated, and whether something exists or not is delineated on the basis of whether it has a valid cognition or knowledge or not. And therefore, everything in samsara and nirvana and so forth are, everything such as the samsara, nirvana and so forth are without any independent existence, but they are merely dependently originated. And similarly, it is the case with the feeling or sensation and so forth. And so when you are remain absorbed in this meditation on emptiness, as it strengthens for more and more, the dualistic appearance also subsides more and more, and you when you are on the path of preparation, and the dualistic appearance becomes thinner and thinner. And then when you reach that of the path of seeing, you are actually, you do away with all dualistic appearance, and you are directly absorbed in emptiness. And that is the actual path of an Arya being. So these are important. The fourfold emptiness is very important. So it may not be something that I have made up, but the text says when the Buddha was absorbed in this appearance of the profound, so the profundity here, although it's not explained, this phrase is not explained in the text. So the profundity refers to emptiness, and the appearance seems to refer to that of the conventional dependence. So Master Tsongkhapa and so Master Chandrakirti says that when you actually look at the things and try to find their nature, what you find is that they do not have any ultimate or independent inherent existence, but then they do exist in conventional terms, and therefore these conventions should not be scrutinized as such. And Master Tsongkhapa in his commentary says that how things exist is by way of mere name. And so this is not he says that this conclusion comes by default because things do not have any independent objective existence, yet they do exist. Therefore, they exist by way of mere name, and therefore one should drive one's mind towards this. So in the 60s, when I was reading this commentary, in Master Tsongkhapa's commentary, this I is merely designated on the basis of psychophysical aggregates. And when I read that part, I had this kind of a lightning bolt striking in my heart, literally. But then later, when I checked within my experience, I found out that I had realized just the gross selflessness, not the subtle selflessness as such of a person. And then Ratnavali lines which says, as long as there is grasping at the aggregates, there's still this grasping at a person. And then, with the help of these lines from Madhyamaka Avatara and Mula Madhyamaka Karika, so when you actually confirm that things have no independent existence, yet how things appear to you is as if they have some independent objective existence. And therefore, I was able to confirm that things appear in a certain way which do not have any reality, yet you cannot reject the existence of things as such. And therefore, as Master Tsongkhapa says, and then at some point, without alternating between the emptiness and the appearance, and so forth, when you are able to see, so those who have studied the philosophical texts must have some kind of a taste of the teachings which has to come through one's contemplation. And so I was asking one of the monks before how his experience or understanding of emptiness has developed, or further or not, and the person was saying it was very difficult for him. And so once I had this qualm whether some quantum physicists who really are convinced that things have no objective existence, they could actually, I had this idea that they could have a different experience of with regard to their, reaction towards things in black and white terms. So I had not heard anything, but recently I've heard that one Chinese quantum physicist from mainland China has actually written an article in which he says that someone who is convinced of such that things have no appearance, no objective existence, is able to actually see a difference in their attitude towards things, not seeing things in black and white terms. And then an American scientist who is a psychiatrist have told me that someone, when he or she becomes angry, actually sees the person or the thing that they are angry at to be absolutely negative, but then the negativeness, 90% of it is merely mental projection, he said. And so, seeing things to be absolutely beautiful or ugly, we actually become either attached or develop aversion towards it. So when you are emotionally charged with anger or attachment or desire, and how do the things appear to you? So when somebody is really angry at somebody, the person actually sees the other person whom you are angry at as being absolutely ugly or repulsive and so forth. But when this anger subsides, you see, oh, that's not exactly the way the person is. And so profundity and appearance seems to refer to emptiness and dependent origination, respectively. And then after that comes the form is empty, emptiness is form. Form is not other than emptiness, and emptiness is not other than form, and form too is not other than emptiness. So you need to actually feel convinced that things have no objective existence whatever, but that they are merely designated. And therefore, the path that you would develop also is merely designated, and the resultant stage of Buddhahood also is merely designated. So all the Buddhas of the three times also became enlightened by cultivating the path of the perfection of wisdom. And so the clarity and luminous nature of the is something that is innately within us. And then with regard to Mahayana Uttara Tantra words, line which says the Buddhas radiate so it is interpreted in two different ways. One is that we have the potential for that of the Buddhahood, Dharmakaya, within ourselves. And therefore, this refers to, this radiation refers to that Buddha nature. So the Buddhas of the three times become enlightened on the basis of this perfection of wisdom. And then the mantra of the Heart Sutra comes. So that yatha means it is thus, and gati, first gati refers to go. So when it's used as an imperative case, go beyond. So first go refers to that of the someone who has not yet entered the path, the Bodhisattva path, should enter this path, which is the path of accumulation. And so that is the first stage when you have the genuine bodhicitta within oneself, intending to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. And then the second gati, which means go, refers to the path of application or preparation. And then paragati means go beyond, refers to going beyond. Go beyond means going to entering the path of the transcendental path. So the first bodhisattva ground at the path of seeing. And then you go through that of those of the seven the rest of the seven grounds. I mean, you go through the seven grounds, which also includes that of the path of meditation. So according to the Madhyamaka philosophical school, because of the difference in their identification of the mental afflictions, I mean, they also differ in terms of what constitutes the obscuration to knowledge as well. So in other words, after having overcome the mental afflictions, then you overcome those of the mental, the obscuration to knowledge. And then, so the path of meditation is referred by Parasangati, and then Bodhi refers to the enlightenment, Buddhahood, and Swaha refers to lay the foundation for it. And so, from the path of accumulation up to Buddhahood, you actually progress along the path. So with regard to the practice of the teaching of the Buddha, first avoid or turn away from the non-meritorious path, and so in other words, to developed what are known as the 16 factors for higher rebirth, which are the 10, avoiding the 10 non-virtuous actions, and then 6 more, such as giving up alcohol and so forth. So in the 400 verses, it's at first turn away from non-virtue, in the middle dispel misconceptions of its notion of a self, and then finally go beyond all philosophical views. One who understands this is wise indeed. And so after having developed this, attained the higher rebirth, then you go through the path for enlightenment and develop bodhicitta. And so, with the help of bodhicitta, which supports your the view of emptiness, then you are able to go beyond or destroy all philosophical views. And then one who understands this is wise. And so in the Bodhicitta, the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, it says all these branches of teachings were taught by the Buddha, by the sage for wisdom. And so what this means is that the final goal of the Buddha's teaching is that of overcoming the obscuration to knowledge or cognitive obscuration, and for that, one should develop that of the wisdom of emptiness, which is supported by that of bodhicitta. And so, understanding or developing this understanding or insight into emptiness with the help of bodhicitta, you are developing this view which fulfills all one's goals. So in other words, the emptiness is also termed as the emptiness with all complete aspect or something. And so this commentary by Gyanamitra is a short one. Therefore, I asked to be translated and to spread. So I don't have the reading transmission of this text as such, but the essential meaning is what I have already explained. So here in Japan, there's so much interest in meditation. And so the second text, the stages of meditation, middle volume, was written in Tibet. And so the Tibetan emperor at that time was Tsong Detsen, who actually was a son of a Chinese princess who married the Tibetan king. And in those old times, Xingnan was the capital of China. And when I visited China in 1954 and 55 on my way back, I was told that the statue of the Buddha called Jo in Jokhang Temple was brought from there. And so there was an empty seat of the Jo in Xingnan Palace at that time when I visited it. And that Jo Shakyamuni statue was actually offered to the Chinese emperor by Indian king in those days. And then from India, therefore from India it went to China, and from China to Tibet. So Tsong Detsen was son of a Tibetan king and a Chinese princess. And so Tsong Detsen wanted to invite some scholar from India, because he considered that the authentic teaching of the Buddha must be invited to and brought to Tibet from India itself, although there was the family relationship with China in those days already. He invited Master Chandrakshita to Tibet, and so these texts. So Master Nagarjuna was said to have lived for 400 or 600 years, according to some old accounts. But whatever the case may be, we have the text that he wrote, and we can actually study them and see his magnanimity, his greatness. So I attended the 550th birth anniversary of the Sikh Guru, Guru Nanak Dev. And one historian, art historian, was talking about the life and legacy of Guru Nanak, and he actually told a story as well to make his point about Guru Nanak. And at the end, I said that these are really great, but there are stories of the Buddha also in Jataka tales, which I do not believe. I told him much. And so, so by reading the text, the teachings given by these masters, you can actually develop faith in the teachers. And 1 year, at a meeting, there was a discussion on whether Mahayana is the teaching of the Buddha or not. And some of them actually said the Mahayana was not taught by the Buddha himself. And then when I talked, I said that today's historians, compared to the Master Nagarjuna, we are living at a time when after 2,500 or 600 years after the Buddha, whereas Master Nagarjuna lived much earlier, about 400 years or so after the Buddha. And so, with regard to the history of India, I said Master Nagarjuna may be more familiar and better. And Master Nagarjuna was not someone who just believed with blind faith in the teaching of the Buddha. So Master Nagarjuna has not said what he has written through reason. He must have investigated into the facts and so forth, and then wrote his text. And so therefore he wrote the 6 collections of reasoning and so forth. And so I believe in what he has said in the Sanskrit tradition, that what he has said is that Mahayana is the teaching of the Buddha. So before Shantarakshita came to Tibet, and of course there were the Chinese meditators, Chinese monks already in Tibet, and then after the Samye monastery was founded, where there were these meditators already. And Master Shantarakshita himself instructed the Tibetans to translate the teachings that are found in Sanskrit, Indian language, into Tibetan, because he said you have your own language and you should study the teaching through your language. And so in Samye monastery, there is a department of the meditators, Chinese meditators, in this department called the Unwavering Concentration Department or section. And then there was also the Tantric Department of white robes. And also according to some scholars, it is even said that this Master Shantarakshita himself put effort in learning Tibetan. So, and under his instruction, the teachings of the Buddha were translated into Tibetan. So today we have over 300 volumes comprising the Kangyur, the translated words of the Buddha, and Tengyur, the translated treatises or exegetical treatises of the Indian masters. And so, after Shantarakshita's passing away, some of the practitioners in this unwavering concentration section of Samye said that there's no need to do study of Buddhism, but merely doing meditation is enough. And so when I visited some monasteries here in Japan, isn't it enough just to do meditation to reach enlightenment? So then I got the impression that there's the same tradition or that was there in Tibet in the Samye monastery still remain here. And therefore, because of these Chinese practitioners saying such things, that meditation alone is enough to reach enlightenment and study is not necessary, Kamalashila was invited. And therefore, they were sitting on one side, and the Chinese monks were on the other side, and in the middle was the Tibetan emperor, Tsongkhapa. And so they had a debate and dialogue between the Indian scholars and the Chinese scholars. And then Tuzong Detsen actually said that Kamalashila and Chandarakshita's system of doing study and then going through the process of study, reflection, and meditation is very good, and he appreciated it. And then he offered flowers to the Chinese meditators, and they were sent off to China. And then, at the request of the Tibetan Emperor Tuzong Detsen, the Master Kamalashila wrote these 3 books of the meditation, stages of meditation. And the middle volume, the stages of meditation, the middle volume is a very good text. So, with regard to the reading transmission, or explanatory transmission of this text, I received it from Sakya Abbot. Sangye Tenzin. And when I met him once in Bodh Gaya, I had a discussion with him, and I asked him if he had the transmission of this text. And so he told me that once when he was in Samye in central Tibet, he saw one Lama from Kham giving teaching on it. And so, since he had the transmission, I immediately asked him to give it, pass it on to me. So I received the transmission from Khyentse Sangye Tenzin. Right from the beginning, it talks about dependent origination. So it says, under the title, the caption, what is mind? It is not possible for omniscient mind to be produced without causes, because if it were, everything could always be omniscient. If things were produced without reliance on something else, they could exist without constraint. There would be no reason why everything could not be omniscient, and so forth. And so, with regard to the Buddha himself, he was an ordinary sentient being like us in the beginning. And then he pursued the study of the teaching and pursued the path, and slowly, gradually, overcame all the defilements within his mind stream and became an omniscient, fully enlightened being in the end. And so, this shows the Buddha was not like not a creator God as such. Whereas, if you assert that things came from a creator God, there are lots of logical fallacies that you would have to actually face, as it is done in Brahmana Vartika Karika by Master Dharmakirti. And so the Buddha went through the path and became enlightened, a Buddha. And so what are the causes? What are the causes of omniscience? On page 140. So, of course, the very subtle points of the teaching of the Buddha for them, we need to resort to some scriptural citations. But before that, we need to actually be able to see that certain teachings could actually be inferred, the meaning of them could be inferred through fact-based reasoning. And through that, we could actually gain insight into the very obscure, hidden meaning of the teaching. And so, with regard to past and future lives also, we could infer them based on our experience, empirical experience, and then use reasoning to infer that such and such things could be, is true. And therefore, with regard to certain main teachings of the Buddha, that can be actually proved through inferential logic. We could actually infer or come to confirm that other teachings that the Buddha gave could also be believed, because the Buddha would not have told lie at all. And so, because these teachings can be confirmed through logic, and that the logic does not undermine them as such, therefore we can believe in them. And so it says, I, who am like a blind man, may not be in a position to explain by myself, but I shall employ the Buddha's own words, just as he spoke them to his disciples after his enlightenment. And so it said, he said, Vajrapani, Lord of Secrets, the transcendental wisdom of omniscience has its roots in compassion and arises from a cause, the altruistic thought, the awakening mind of bodhicitta, and the perfection of skillful means. So the bodhicitta is that which is developed on the basis of one's compassion and that of the special resolve to shoulder the responsibility of enlightening, bringing all sentient beings to enlightenment. And then comes the compassion, meditation on or cultivation of compassion, and the measure of having developed compassion. And then, in order to develop compassion, the great compassion, which actually is the wish or desire to and or to save sentient beings from suffering, we need to actually first be able to identify what suffering is, which inflicts sentient beings. With regard to the painful, obvious painful experiences called suffering of suffering, of course, these can be overcome through provisions such as food and drinks and so forth. And then there is the second type of suffering, the suffering of change or changeable suffering. These are all contaminated pleasure, which finally ends up in suffering. And the suffering that we are talking about to overcome in terms of how sentient beings are infected by suffering, we are actually referring to this deeper suffering, which is the existential, pervasive suffering, conditioned suffering. And so it is said that because of that, the rest of the suffering or misery comes. And so, when you are able to see this is something that needs to be overcome, you'll be able to actually have the wish or desire to overcome the psychophysical aggregates and its causes. And so, in order to develop great compassion, you need to see suffering, the three types of suffering, and especially the third one, which is the conditioning, existential, pervasive suffering. As long as you are under the sway of the afflictive emotions and karma, there's no freedom from it. And then you also need to develop this love, which wishes others to have. In order to develop this compassion, you also need to cherish others, be affectionate, And then you develop great resolve, the special resolve, and then bodhicitta, which actually focuses on enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. And so when you actually go through Bodhisattva Charya Avatara, which has lots of debate between self-cherishing attitude and cherishing others over oneself, cherishing self-cherishing attitude, this extreme self-centeredness is actually made dumbfounded through lots of reasonings and logic. And then, this text is really marvelous for developing this altruistic attitude. And then regarding emptiness, there are the teachings, books written by Master Nagarjuna, and also the commentaries to them by Chandrakirti, his Madhyamaka Avatara, and also his Prasanna Pada. And so, with regard to the subtle points, difficult points of the Madhyamaka view, there are lots of qualms raised and also dealt with in the Prasanna Pada, which are really marvelous reasonings. And so, there is here in this text, you have the meditation on equanimity, loving kindness, and compassion. And then, it says, for these reasons, those who wish to attain thoroughly purified transcendental wisdom by eliminating all obscurations should meditate on wisdom while remaining in calm abiding. And so this is referred to as the ultimate bodhicitta. So, with regard to Madhyamaka's school, within which there are the Savatantrika Madhyamakas, and within which there are the two sub-schools, the Yogacara Savatantrika Madhyamakas, which in the Sakya tradition is referred as the higher Savatantrika school, and the Sautantrika Savatantrika Madhyamakas are referred as the lower Savatantrika Madhyamakas. So mere concentration or calm abiding will not be with that merely calm abiding, merely having calm abiding will not actually overcome our afflictive emotions, it says in the text. So in order to have a true experience, a direct perceptual experience of emptiness, you need single-pointed concentration. In other words, the three baskets of the teaching of the Buddha comprise the Vinaya, which teaches that of the practice of morality, and then there is also the so the Vinaya teaches morality, and the Sutras teach that of concentration, and Abhidharma touches on that of Vipassana. Sorry. So you train yourself in mindfulness and introspection in connection with the practice of morality, keeping the vows and precepts, for which you need to actually be mindful and introspective. And then you develop concentration on the basis of that. Regarding the prerequisites of the So you should be in a very quiet and serene place where you are not distracted by the different noise of like vehicles, aeroplanes, bus, and so forth. So you should seek a secluded place, because these noise and is considered as an obstacle to our single-pointed concentration. So in sitting in meditation, you should have a certain physical posture. So ideally, the left foot should be on the left leg, right leg, and the right foot should be on the left leg. And so sitting in a Vajra cross-legged posture may give some pain. And so if you sit on a chair, it should also be fine. Otherwise, you can sit cross-legged in the lotus posture. And then hands should be held in this way, with the left hand under the right hand, and then the two thumbs, the tip of two thumbs touching, and placing this mudra right at your navel. And then you should straighten your spine and touch the tip of your tongue on the upper palate, and hold your head slightly bent forward, and the eyes should focus on the tip of the nose, and then the shoulders should be placed rather naturally, and breath should be natural, not too strong, not too weak. And so these are the 8 Vajrayana postures. So of course, if you have physical problems, it's a different case. So if you are able to sit in this posture of the Vajrayana posture, it has its own significance, especially when you later do tantric practices. So if you bend your body to the right or left more, then there is also some disturbance in the flow of the energy in the right and left channel, which also bring up emotions such as attachment and so forth. So if you open your mind, it would have, you would be breathing very strongly, and then you will have dry throat, dry mouth. And so you should close your lips, mouth, rather naturally, and the tip of the tongue should touch the upper palate for the flow of wind or air to be natural, neither too strong nor too weak. And so with regard to the object of your the focus of your meditation, it could be anything, such as a piece of wood and so forth. But because concentration is developed on the basis of the 6th mind and not our visual consciousness or anything. So first, of course, you have to look, if you use the flower, for example, you should look at the flower and have a very clear image of the flower in your mind after having looked at it. And with that image in your mind, you should focus your mind on that image of the flower in your mind. So I have some friends, and especially an American friend who has spent many years in meditation and is able to spend 3-4 hours in single-pointed concentration. And then during that meditation, this person is able to actually go through some dissolution process as well. And so, when you are able to stay in meditation, single-pointedly focusing your mind on the object that you have chosen as your focus for 3 to 4 hours, at a stretch, you are said to have developed this single-pointed concentration called calm abiding. And I have interest in actually meeting with some Hindu sadhus, meditators, who live up in the Himalayan mountains. So it seems that those who believe or in an Atman or an independent soul are able to develop single-pointed concentration better than us who reject such an independent Atman. So once you are able to stay focused in concentration, you then develop this special insight, extraordinary insight, which refers to the seeing how things are extraordinarily. The non-Buddhist practitioners see the desire ram emotions to be very gross and see the higher ram states of mind, such as the formal and formless realms, mental state in those realms to be more peaceful, and therefore this is their goal. So I'm looking forward to hearing some instructions from these non-Buddhist practitioners who have developed single-pointed concentration. So Master Buddha has actually said that this notion of an independent self is the root of all views, and it is like the devilish mind. Because it serves as the root or cause of our attachment, anger, and so forth. So it is said that there is no self apart from the psychophysical aggregates, nor from amongst the psychophysical aggregates. And then Master Nagarjuna says, this kind of independent self is not one with the aggregates, nor separate from it. It is not in the aggregates, nor the aggregates are in it. So when you are not able to assert that a self or an I is merely designated, not being able to say that, you then are pushed to assert that the self must be either separate from the mind and body aggregates or something which is from amongst these aggregates. So sometimes this innate clear light mind seems to be this self which we reject. But even that, when you do critical analysis of it, you'll see that it does not have any, it cannot be the self. And so when you do this kind of a subtle scrutiny of the self and the innate clear light mind and so forth, you'll see that nothing can be found to be the self. In that case, is the self non-existent? Then the Buddha goes on to say in the same text, following the one where he says that the self is like the chariot Just as a chariot designated on the basis of its paths, likewise a person or self is designated on the basis of the psychophysical aggregates. So these are really good lines to think. So sometimes when I try to prove to some people about the past and future lives, I find it easier to explain that on the basis of the self, which is permanent, which is separate from the aggregates. So within the consciousness, there are those which are, the degrees of subtlety. So we have the waking state, which are grosser than the sleep state and so forth. And within, when you go through the stages of dying, there are those of the 8 stages, and the dissolution of the 80 conceptions is subtler. And then there are those of the, called the subtle clear light of death. And so, therefore, we can talk about people who stay in meditative equipoise at the time of dying. So, mind can be proved on the basis of the homogeneity between the later and earlier moments of the consciousness. So, some children really have, Indian children have a very clear memory of their past life. And then one of our Tibetan teachers, whose reincarnation I have met recently, he remembered past life when he was very young. But then when I met him last time, I asked him if he could remember the past life. He said no. And then I said, now it's good that I have another companion. For me also, remembering past life now is not possible. And then, during the 9/11 incident in tragedy in America, many people died. And I have heard that there's a child who is able to remember his past life, who died in that tragic destruction of the Twin Towers in New York. So there are people who are able to remember past life, and this remembrance, the recollecting past life happens because there is past life. There's something to be recollected. And with regard to even the material world, the external world has its continuation that can be traced back to the Big Bang and so forth. So there's no, in other words, there's no beginning to it. And similarly, the mind has no beginning. So a person or a being cannot be found within the aggregates on the basis of which the person is designated. And then I was talking about developing the concentration, and in order to develop this calm abiding or tranquil abiding, you need to go through the 9 steps, such as placing the mind and patching the mind up again, placing again, and so forth. And then the obstacle to the single-pointed concentration are twofold. It's twofold, that of mental laxity and mental excitation. So if you are not alert when you are meditating, this alertness, pure, alertness must be there. If your mind is not really fully alert, there is this mental sinking or mental laxity that has fallen on you. So I have a monk, Lama, a friend who did meditation in Ladakh, and he told me that after his 3-year meditation, his mind became rather less clear. The clarity seems to have diminished, and this, I think, is an indication that mental laxity or mental sinking has actually accumulated over the period of time he meditated. And so it's very important for the meditators here in Japan. Whereas excitation or distraction is easier to recognize and identify, but mental laxity is more subtler and more difficult to identify, especially the subtle laxity. Although you may be able to sit in focused. When your mind is rather clouded, you are just like daydreaming, like that is mental cloudiness, whereas the mental laxity is when you lose alertness while being able to stay focused. If your alertness is not there, that is the sign of mental laxity or sinking. So when you are able to stay focused, free from this mental laxity and mental excitation, which is distraction towards the essential object, then you are able to sit in single-pointed concentration well. And when you push further, you are able to stay in that focus, single-pointed focus, concentration. First with some effort and then effortlessly, and then you develop what is known as a physical pliancy, which helps, mental pliancy, which helps in physical pliancy, which in turn reinforces your mental pliancy and thereby are able to develop this single-pointed concentration, full single-pointed concentration. And then when you do tantric practice, meditating, visualizing yourself as a deity, of course, you should do it within the understanding of emptiness. Even the non-Buddhist practitioners I know have these practices of developing, visualizing themselves as deity, and also they do have practices such as projecting the mind out of the body and transferring it into others, another body, and so forth. And then they also have the practice of offering this fire puja, the homa, and so forth. So the main practice in doing tantric deity yoga practice also is, in Buddhism, is that of the meditation on emptiness. And then having developed single-pointed concentration, you go on to develop that of the special insight into with regard to mainly the emptiness. And so in this text, Master Kamalashila says that the yogis should stick to vegetarian food, not eating meat and so forth.
너디 telling your son you so short telling you won't see telling your son similar to the jabber this g me will level zinum when the chinum
So having developed concentration, when you're able to focus your mind on the object that you have chosen, then you should check whether whether this mental sinking and distraction are falling in your mind or not. So when you are in a low spirit in your meditation, you should actually raise your mind, uplift it by thinking about the Buddha's illuminated body and so forth. And then when you are too highly motivated or energized, then you may fall into distraction and excitement. And so for these, to counter that, you should actually meditate on emptiness, nature of impermanent nature, and also the filthy nature of the body and so forth. So, as an antidote to mental sinking, you should uplift the mind, and for excitation, you should actually, make it more somber. So, having developed calm abiding, then one should develop that of the Vipassana. So this text by Kamalashila, who was a student of Shantarakshita, they were followers of the Savatantrika Madhyamaka. So Shantarakshita initiated the Yogacara Savatantrika Madhyamaka, which actually follows the assertions of the Chittamatra, the mind-only school as well. And then there's the meditation on the mind, analyzing it. You cannot find anything that you can pinpoint as being the mind as such. So once you have overcome the distraction and mental sinking and excitation and so forth, and then when you actually do analytical meditation with regard to the reality of how things are, and then you develop that of the special insight. So the Japanese meditators, great meditators of Japan, if you could study this text, well, it would be very helpful. So with this, I will conclude the teaching on the stages of meditation. Next, we'll go through the text by Master Tsongkhapa in praise of dependent origination, or in praise of the Buddha for teaching dependent origination. Or maybe I should teach it tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow. So food at this stage is more important than teaching this text by Master Tsongkhapa. And then for the bhikshus, the fully ordained monks, they must take their midday meal by 12. So in Burma and other Theravada countries, this practice of keeping the Buddhist monastic vow is very strictly followed. So in Tibet, we are not following it very very strictly
この方を
まあね